Well, everybody, I am so excited to welcome in to talk about this really exciting book that I think many of us are going to be interested in. Brian Kramp is here. Brian, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Terry. Thank you for having me.
Oh my goodness. Brian is the author of the brand new book, This Band Has No Past: How Cheap Trick Became Cheap Trick. Oh, Brian, this is such a terrific book. Everything I'm hearing and reading about it, it must validate all the time and effort that you've put into it.
Yeah, it's really when you put something like this out into the world, you really have no idea how to react because how people will react because it's impossible to be objective about it
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah. Well, you grew up a fan of Cheap Trick, as did so many of us. And I find this interesting because you really did sort of that deep dive into the before. And of course, they all have history with other bands. And I guess my question for you right now, though, is why did you decide to go even before there was a band called Cheap Trick to really dig into their past?
Well, because, there's more than a decade of history of all four guys in Cheap Trick playing in bands before they end up together
Yeah.
in Cheap Trick. And especially for Rick Nielsen, it was a journey of trying to find the right band, and he went through a lot of different people before he made it, before he finally had the four guys that were going to finally find success, because he had a record deal with a previous band and that didn't work out at all, and he moved out to Philadelphia and formed a band in Philadelphia, and that ended up having Tom Peterson and Bonnie Carlos in that band called Sick Man of Europe. So those three guys with a different singer named Stookie had a band in Philadelphia. There was so much that happened before, they finally had the Cheap Trick with Robin Zander singing. There was even a different singer in Cheap
Yeah.
Trick for a year and a half. So that really is the story of Cheap Trick, is the saga of these four guys finally coming together.
And then just never stopping.
Yeah.
I mean, even today, they play constantly. My goodness.
Yeah.
Okay. So you grew up in Waukesha and you
Mm-hmm.
went to UW Madison. And
Mm-hmm.
I think many of us may know those are two important places in early Cheap Trick. And they played often across Wisconsin. I think some people sometimes forget they're from, considered from Rockford and maybe think they're from Wisconsin. But, you as a fan, why was it so important for you to tell this story?
Yeah, because I think they're the greatest rock band of all time, in my opinion, and they've always been kind of the band's band. They're more of a band that other musicians and big record collectors love,
Yeah.
but the general public doesn't think of them on the same level as some of the more successful groups. But I think they were also hugely influential on a lot of other bands. Cheap Trick is one of the only bands that all of the guys in the 80s who were in heavy metal bands loved them, but then all of the guys in the 90s who were in grunge and alternative bands also loved them.
Wow.
So they kind of had this universal appeal. They were able to open for Kiss on tour with Kiss, but they also, people like Stiff Records and Trouser Press and all these kind of I call it the intelligentsia of the music business, also loved them. There wasn't another band. For example, Cheap Trick, they were on tour in Europe with Kansas in 1977, but they took a break to play a punk rock show at a punk club with two punk bands opening.
That's
There's no other
awesome.
band. Yeah, there's no other band that could be on tour with Kansas and play a punk show. It's just, so they're a really special band in the history of rock, and I think it can easily be overlooked how influential they were as
Oh,
well.
wow. I definitely agree with you. And I love these stories. Do you
Hmm.
remember the first time you saw Cheap Trick and where was it?
Yeah, it was at Summerfest, and I went with my friend Craig, who I've seen Cheap Trick with many, many times over the years, and yeah.
Well, I want to ask you, I mean, you had to talk to a lot of people for this book. And I think
Hmm.
I read or heard somewhere that you put about 5 years of work into this book. I mean, that's a lot of time, but these interviews must have really taken up a big chunk. What do you think stands out about any of the interviews you did, or were there any great surprises that maybe you hung up the phone or after talking to somebody you went, ha, that was awesome?
Oh yeah, there was, yeah, that's the thing, is you have to talk to a lot of people because you never
Mm-hmm.
know who's going to have a great story, and that will lead you on to the next person. You know, you get one
Yeah.
name here and then you find them and talk to them. So yeah, you just have to keep talking to everyone. There's plenty of interviews I did, which there's not really a lot in the book from those interviews, but you never know what you're going to get. So you just have to talk to every name you hear, or you know, you pick up on, oh, this person might have been around for this. But yeah, you know, one of my favorite moments was when I was talking to Joel Danzig. He worked for Hamer Guitar. He was one of the co-founders of Hamer Guitars, which was a very important part of the Cheap Trick story.
Yeah.
He's the person responsible for building the first 12-string bass. And when you see
Oof.
Rick Nielsen with his 5-neck guitar,
Yeah.
or his, you know, they call it Uncle Dick, he has a guitar of himself. Joel Danzig was responsible for building these things. And
Oh,
but Joel Danzig revealed to me how the checkerboard pattern became a part of the Cheap Trick aesthetic, because he played a role in that. And that's something I would have never even known. You know, you find when you're doing something like this, the best questions a lot of the time are the ones you don't even know to ask. And so you just have to hope the information comes out. For example, there's a really great story about Patti Smith in my book that
oh,
Bunny Carlos probably hadn't even thought about that story in 40 years. And it just happened to come up when we were talking about the recording studio where they recorded in New York. So you never know what's going to come out in the interviews that you would have had no idea. I had no idea there was any Patti Smith story
no
relating to
kidding.
Cheap Trick. So
Wow.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Everybody's going to have to read the book now.
Yeah.
That's good. I love it. Um, you mentioned also, and we kind of talked about this right off the bat here with this interview, back then playing every night, everywhere, anytime. And it feels like, 45 years later, they're still kind of doing that. But is that what really drew you to this part of their story, the 45 years ago, and knowing they were kind of willing to do whatever it would take to make it?
Yeah, and the Cheap Trick were a band that could have moved to New York City in the mid 70s and fit right in on the CBGB scene with the
Yeah.
Ramones and Blondie and whatever. Or they could have moved to Los Angeles in the mid 70s and fit right into the Sunset Strip scene with Van Halen. But instead, they built their own Sunset Strip, Max's Kansas City type scene
Yeah.
in the Midwest. And they had this whole circuit of bars and clubs they could play, mostly in Illinois and Wisconsin. They would play in Minneapolis and go to Michigan, go to Iowa, but almost all the shows they played were in this kind of circuit in Illinois and Wisconsin. And yeah, they were making a decent living just as a Midwest band, but at the same time, with the songs they were playing, the songs Rick Nielsen was writing, and
Yeah.
there was no other band like them. And so, they were kind of a best kept secret in the Midwest for a while, because they had a lot of fans who, for example, I talked to Chris Crow, who's the person who actually designed their logo. But
Oh.
the reason he the reason he designed their logo is because he loved the band so much.
Oh my
And
gosh.
he ended up moving to Los Angeles and having a career in film and television. But his dad had a graphic design studio in Racine, and he just created their logo all on his own. The band had no idea he was doing it. And then he just took it to a show and handed it to them. And the reason he did it is because he loved the band so much, and he felt he was an artist himself, and he felt this kind of creative kinship. He respected their creativity so much, and he felt like he had his own gift that he could contribute to that. And so that's what he wanted to do. And that logo is an amazing logo, and I think it really contributed to the band's kind of mystique,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it really helped them moving forward, and it set them apart because it wasn't like any other 70s rock logo.
Mm-mm.
And so that's, Cheap Trick managed to fit in with 70s rock, but also punk rock and new wave and stuff like that. And I think a part of that is because of things like their image and their logo. So yeah, that's a great example of the kind of fan they had.
Yeah.
Was a person like Chris Crow, who was more than just loved them for more than just the music, but a big part of it was the music, but it was
Yeah.
just everything that went into it. And so he
Ugh.
made that logo just out of that love and respect for them.
Well, we mentioned that, yeah, this book is getting great reviews. What do you think? Is this going to be the first in a series of Cheap Trick books from you? I
Well,
mean, there's
this
much more to write about, I bet.
there is, but the story gets a lot messier when you go into
Oh,
the
okay.
80s. Uh, one big one thing I wanted to do with this book was not have anything in the book that might make one of the band members angry.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's a couple of things I left out that I learned along the way because I wasn't looking to delve into their personal lives or anything like that. I think when you move into the 80s, well, for one thing, everybody knows the story of a rock star. Once a band becomes successful, it becomes a lot more predictable, but also they become a lot more secretive and sheltered, and everything is going to be off the record. And so I think it becomes a lot more difficult to write the next chapter, but also if you're going to tell the truth. For example, Tom Peterson ends up not being in the band anymore in 1980, and the official story for why he wasn't in the band anymore, it's just that, the official story. Now, I don't think I could even get the real story, and if I did, it would be off the record.
Right,
So
right.
yeah, it would be, and I wouldn't want to write the next chapter if I couldn't tell the real story
Yeah.
of, for example, why Tom Peterson was out of the band. So it seems like, yeah, I don't know if it could really be done the way I would want to do it.
Yeah. And I guess, there is also the mystique about those early days that you've written about. And it does show you what it takes, and that's kind of what you always wonder, like, how does this band make it? How does this other band not? But I think what you're writing about is you're showing us how this particular band is going to make it, and they do, obviously. So it's just terrific. It's one of those questions you always have in your mind, and you're helping us understand how they did it. So thanks for that. My goodness. um I'm going to assume right now this book is available everywhere and anywhere. Google it. I think that's what I did, and you can find it. And I guess as a first-time author, Brian, just to sort of end this conversation, what makes you happiest about doing this?
Well, I've always been a writer, and I've always been a big reader of these kind of books. And
Yeah.
I'm an obsessive music fan. I have 4,000 records. I have a whole library of these kind of books. So I don't know. I don't know if when I began aspiring to write this kind of a book, it was a long process to get here, but it's still surreal. It just came out on Tuesday.
Yeah.
But yeah, this has been a part of my life for my whole life, just being a big music fan and reading all these kind of books. And now that I've contributed to the canon, if you will, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a point of pride, and it's definitely, anyone who has known me in my life would know that this is kind of the thing I would want to do and maybe be capable of doing. And so it's very gratifying to have accomplished something like this. And hopefully, this book is actually published by a real publisher. So hopefully I'm getting my foot in the door, because I really would like to do more going forward.
Excellent. Well, congratulations. I mean, this first one is a home run, and it's very, very
Thank you.
cool. Yeah, thank
Thanks.
you. Oh my goodness. So that's Brian Kramp, and he is the author of This Band Has No Past: How Cheap Trick Became Cheap Trick. And this is Max Inc. Radio, and we are local music.